Facebook filing an antitrust suit to split up Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp into different companies. But can they or should they? Let's talk about it with our friend Rob Winterton, senior contributor at Young Voices, the director of public affairs for the trade group Net Choice, up late with me on the Final Five. I believe, Rob, the first time we've had you on the show during this whole era, certainly since you left us here in the D.C. area and moved to sunnier confines in Florida.
Yes, no, that's totally right. Totally right. Actually, the last time I was on the show was just before everything started locking down.
I think you were our last guest in studio since then.
Yeah, I was.
You're absolutely right. Well, look, we know that nothing has happened since that. No. Let's talk about this because we there's this whole specter of big tech, and it factors into the political conversation. It factors into the business conversation. You work with a trade group. Facebook is part of that alliance there. And we know that the technology companies have become a very hot topic in the national conversation. What was the initial reaction among your peers when this came down, when this report came out?
We just thought it was, a ridiculous kind of assertion that that Facebook needs to be broken up in some way. I think if you talk to everyday Americans and you say, what do you think the government should be focusing on right now? I don't think it's really going after one of the most popular brands in the country, who owns, other services that are super popular like Instagram too. I think people are a little bit more concerned about, well, as you say, the other stuff going on at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because there's always this talk of competition, and I can think about it through the years where, I believe I had Friendster back when that was a thing, and then I had Friendster in a MySpace account. Then Friendster went away. Then I had MySpace, and I had Facebook, and MySpace sort of crept itself away and faded away into the ether. But I think the reality is, it's one thing to talk about competition. It's another thing to talk about how useful these various apps are. We know that they serve different purposes. We know that there are other competitors out there. It's just a matter of the fact that look, we have complaints about sometimes the content that's on apps like Facebook, but it's about innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are lots of other discussions, such as you brought up, content moderation is one of them, privacy is another. But antitrust and what the FCC is pushing for, breaking up Facebook isn't how you achieve that. If you want privacy legislation, you have privacy legislation. You don't just rip companies apart. And, the reason that a lot of these companies are quite so innovative is because, yes, they are big and they can then invest a lot of money into research and development and, creating cool new services. And I don't really think that if we go around breaking up companies, that it's not entirely clear, I think, at all to the everyday American why we would do that. Then we're going to see a decrease in innovation in this country. And that sets us back on the world stage, too.
I feel like we started bringing you onto the show when we started having the national conversation when it came to things like net neutrality and these efforts that we've seen from the federal level in the past. Obviously, the FCC was in charge of deciding what to do when it came to that so-called net neutrality, and those rules went away. There has not been a demonstrable change in how we access the internet in our homes. As we move ahead with this, we have a different administration coming in. Do we think that the approach to tech policy will be any different as we go into the Biden era as opposed to the Trump era? Because you're going from what should be an administration with a free market approach, or at least said to have a free market approach. Now you're going a little more progressive here, where sometimes they don't necessarily stand for the same things.
Right. Now, I would separate President Trump a little bit from the rest of the Republicans on this, who have, I would say, been pretty mixed. Some have kept their free market principles. But Trump on tech policy has kind of moved away, and maybe in some ways he's free market, but not really on tech policy. Mm-hmm. So I think the main change that we're actually going to see is that tech policy is probably going to be a little bit less personal. What I mean by that is a lot of Trump's attacks on tech have resulted from his personal dislike of certain players in the industry, mm-hmm. rather than because of an ideological belief. Biden's is more likely going to come from the Democrats, right? They are a little bit more pro-regulation. They are a little bit more skeptical of free markets. And so it's going to be more of, I think, a policy rounded, and I think that presents some challenges for our industry. I think it also might present maybe a little bit more of a calmer environment when it comes to, we're not going to be hearing about regulations from Twitter. We're likely going to be hearing about them in a more traditional way, but it's still going to be, the heat's onto the tech industry, and yeah. I do think it's misplaced. And, I hope that the Biden administration doesn't quite throw around and go after tech in the way that Trump has, unfortunately.
Well, I know, too, as we look at how President Trump, how he won the election in 2016, one can argue it due in no small fact to his ability to harness social media insofar as a Twitter in his case. Joe Biden, a different situation there, no doubt about that. Hey, Rob, good to see you again. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Great.